good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I'm so thrilled that you're joining me this Friday morning here on Now TV. Listen, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, share the word about our program here. And don't forget, be sure to tune in to William Bell's Saturday afternoon program here on Now TV as well. William is a fantastic Bible teacher. And I've said this for many, many years, and William Bell and I have been working together since the mid-'80s. We're extremely good friends. And I have always said, I continue to say it because it continues to be true. There's not a time when I hear him speak that he does not just open up vistas of understanding, that he does not challenge my thinking, and again, opening up vistas of thought for me that I had not thought about. I mean, it's really exciting to listen to William Bell. His insights are incredible. So be sure to tune in to William Bell on Saturday afternoons on Now TV. You'll be glad that you did. Well, listen, I do hope that you are safe. I do hope that you are healthy. I hope that you are continuing to maintain the proper practice, the proper protocols. Well, that's almost hard to say, isn't it? and that you are wearing your mask, that you are observing the social distancing. I see some really, really encouraging things happening around the world. The infection rate in many areas that had been skyrocketing is now flattening out and actually declining. And what is even more exciting, what is even more optimistic for us to consider is the fact that the mortality rate, even in areas of higher infection, the mortality rate is going down. I saw a report just the other day in which it was showing that the mortality rate in areas where the infection rate had been rather high, and yet the mortality rate was actually less than 1%. Now, folks, that's amazing. And it tells us that probably what's happening, two things. Number one, the medical procedures, the medical practices to treat COVID have improved. They now know more of what is effective and what is not. Number two, they are trying some additional kind of treatments that are showing tremendous promise. Here in America, President Trump, by executive order, just okayed a plasma treatment which takes blood from recovered COVID patients, those who have gone through it, they've survived it, and they're well now. It takes plasma from these individuals, and of course I don't know all the science on it, but they process it somehow, and they inject that into people who are infected. The potential for this is absolutely incredible because the antibodies in the bodies of those individuals who have recovered are very, very powerful. And so Mr. Trump, bypassing all the red tape, bypassing all of the paranoia, I might add, has okayed that kind of treatment. So we have better medical treatment, and I think also probably what we are seeing a little bit is this community immunity concept that I've mentioned to you before has perhaps started to kick in. That somehow, you know, the body is absolutely amazing. The human body has the ability to develop its own antibodies. It's to enhance its own immune system. Because after all, let's face it, we are attacked by viruses, by germs, by this and by that every single day of the year. I mean, every single day. And so our body has this amazing ability to develop immunity. So, again, I think that we are beginning to see some rather positive things. That doesn't mean that we can relax. That doesn't mean that we should not still be diligent. It does not mean by any means that we ought to just absolutely ignore the danger. But we can take heart that things seem emphasis on seem, things seem to be improving in many areas. And listen, I've got to address this. I have people contacting me and saying, look, Don, this whole COVID thing it's just a government hoax to create paranoia, to create dependence on the government. There's nothing to it. Well, with all due respect to those individuals, and some of these people who have mentioned this to me are people that I correspond with on a regular basis. I have respect for these individuals. But I have to tell you, I also correspond with people who have lost family members to COVID-19. The doctors diagnosed them as that. They were treated for that, and yet they died from it. Did the doctors lie to them when they diagnosed these individuals as having contracted COVID? What would be the motivation for that? Are you going to tell me that every doctor in America is in on this conspiracy? I don't think that that's a tenable position to take. So, while I don't doubt that governments have ulterior motives, folks, I don't doubt that for a moment. At the same time, number one, the COVID is very real. It's very dangerous. So whatever we might think about government involvement in it, that does not negate the danger. That does not negate the idea that we have to be cautious and careful and practice proper protocol. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now. I hope that you understand why I have said what I have said. Now, I want to continue our study of the fascinating subject of the challenge of Christ. What is the challenge of Christ? Well, again, I'm not going to take an awful lot of time to repeat it, but very simply stated, it is, Jesus said, do not believe me for my word's sake, believe me for my works. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. What was the work that the Father gave him? Well, the Father gave him the work of coming in judgment, coming in the resurrection, Matthew 16, 27 and 28, coming in the kingdom, in the lifetime of the first century generation. Therefore, Jesus' own challenge to us today is that if he did not come, while some of those people alive 2,000 years ago were alive, if he did not come in judgment, we are not supposed to believe in him. You know, I find it absolutely interesting. I just ordered a book, Why I Am Not a Christian, by a scholar by the name of Richard Carrier. And he follows in the heels of many atheists who give their, quote, reasons, unquote, for not being Christians. And that follows in the lineage of men like Bertrand Russell, who around the turn of the 20th century wrote a book, Why I Am Not a Christian, and he gave 5 reasons. Now, Mr. Carrier gives 4 reasons, and, you know, I got to tell you, in scanning this book, I'm stunned by the logical fallacies, the ad hominem, the presuppositions that are at work in the book, the empty claims, and setting himself up basically as the standard of, quote, common sense, unquote, and ridiculing Christians. And this is from a man that is recognized as one of the top atheists in the world. And yet he wrote this book that and again, I haven't read it in depth, but what I've scanned is extremely, extremely poor logic. Well, anyway, I say all of that to point out that Bertrand Russell, it's interesting to me that Mr. Carrier does not make this objection. He gives 4 reasons why he's not a Christian. Now, he knew about Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell gave 5 reasons for why he was not a Christian. One of those reasons was Jesus said he was going to come back in the first century at the end of human history, he obviously didn't do it. The apostles reiterated his claim, reiterated his prediction. The apostles' prediction, just like Jesus's, failed. Therefore, Jesus and the New Testament writers were all false. They were not inspired. Jesus is not the Son of God. The apostles were false men. Do you see the problem? Atheists have used this challenge, their perceived failure of Jesus, of the apostles, of the Bible, to claim that Jesus cannot be the Son of God. Now, this is more than remarkable, folks, because the church, historically, has failed to address this challenge. I've shared with you how John MacArthur, a noted theologian of modern times, admits, yeah, Jesus seemed to predict his coming for the first century. And yes, skeptics have used that failure of prediction against him. Oh, but we don't need to take heart because, what Jesus meant by that terminology, by the language that he used, was he simply wanted the church of every generation to believe their generation would be the time of his coming. Jesus wanted the church of every generation to be on, quote, from MacArthur, the tiptoe of expectation for 2,000 years? Folks, that makes no sense whatsoever. It's just like the Proverbs writer says in Proverbs chapter 12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. The church has been waiting, wrongly, for 2,000 years for Jesus to come. What is the solution to this challenge? Well, I've been sharing with you that when Jesus said he was going to come in the glory of the Father, he was saying that he was going to come just like the Father had come many times in the Old Testament. I've shown you how God had come many times in the Old Testament, but he had never come literally, visibly, physically, and bodily. Well, since Jesus said he was going to come just like that, then the view of the, quote, modern church, yes, for 2,000 years, the view of the church that Jesus predicted that he was going to come on a literal cloud and put an end to literal history, come in a physical body at the end of time, is a false understanding of Jesus' own words. So we've been going to 2 Peter chapter 3 because people say, skeptics say it, Christians say it. I hear this all the time when I'm dealing with people who are Christian and they object to the fulfilled view of eschatology, what is known as the preterist view. They say, look, Preston, I know that some prophecy was fulfilled. So I am a partial preterist because some partial prophecy were fulfilled. But in 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter foretold the day of the Lord in which the earth and the elements therein would be burned up. You, by denying that that's in our future, you are one of the very skeptics that Peter talked about when he said that in the last days the scoffers would come, saying, where's the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were since the beginning of creation. And they say, see, Peter said in the last days scoffers would come. We're living in the last days. No, no, no. 1,000 times no. As I have shared with you, and listen to me, folks, go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Go to my store, do a search for the last days identified. Order that book and be sure, now when you order the book, it will charge you $4.95 shipping, all right? And you go ahead and pay that, but if you send me a note that says, hey Don, I saw your special offer on Last Days Identified on Now TV. If you send me that note, I'll refund your shipping and that'll save you $5. But you see, what I do in that book is I examine every major biblical text that discusses the last days, and I show that the last days that the Bible talks about is not the Christian age, it's not time, it is the last days, the last generation of Israel's old covenant existence. And that reality, that realization changes everything. Because when we harmonize the fact that Jesus said He was going to come at the climax of the last days, that means He was going to come at the end of Israel's Old Covenant age. Pardon me. And that means He truly was going to come as the Father had come in the Old Testament. I have been sharing with you that we have absolute, definitive proof that we're not living in the last days of the scoffers that Peter foretold. We are not living in the time in which those scoffers would appear, and when they appeared, they would be destroyed by the day of the Lord. Now listen to me very, very carefully. Peter is very clear from 2 Peter 2, I'll get to it in a moment, and 2 Peter chapter 3, that the false teachers, the false apostles, the false prophets, i.e. the scoffers, when they appeared, not generations, not thousands of years after they appeared, but when they appeared, they would be destroyed at the day of the Lord. Let's turn back to 2 Peter chapter 2 and read again verses 1 to 3. There were also false prophets among the people, as also there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring upon themselves, watch this, swift destruction. Do you see? When they appear, they will function and they will bring swift destruction upon themselves. They would not appear and operate for generation after generation after generation after generation. They would not appear and operate for 2,000 years. And then finally, ultimately, God would come at some future generation and destroy the false teachers of that generation. No, they would appear, they would work, and they would be destroyed at the coming of the Lord. And notice he drives that home. Many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time now, their judgment has not slumbered, or has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. Listen, folks, here is the Holy Spirit through Peter saying, listen to me. When these scoffers, when these deniers, when these false prophets, when these false teachers appear, their destruction is ready to fall. It is not asleep. And of course, here's the critical element. As the Greek tenses of 2 Peter chapter 2 shows, it's really interesting that Peter vacillates between the future tense, they will come, and then he uses the present active indicative. This has caused a host of world-class scholars to take note of the fact that Peter is using what is known as a rhetorical device. Now remember, he tells us in 2 Peter chapter 3 that the Old Testament foretold, the Old Testament prophesied the coming of the scoffers that he's talking about. Those scoffers would come in the last days. And in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 20, Peter tells us they were living in the last days. In Acts chapter 2, he said the last days were present. So he was living in the time that the Old Testament foretold. He was living in the time in which the scoffers had appeared. So his vacillation between the future tense and the present active is not a conundrum. We have to realize that he is simply recalling time after time after time by his use of the future tenses. He is recalling the Old Testament prophets. But then when he uses the present active tenses, he is telling us prophecy fulfilled. Do you see that? It's extremely powerful. Now, I shared with you last week, and boy, man alive, time is getting away from me. I shared with you last week that Jude followed Peter. I am well aware of the fact many scholars, perhaps even most, take the position that 2 Peter was written after the book of Jude. Well, look, this is a prime example to me of scholars really not paying attention to the text or overtly denying the text. It's kind of like this. Many people believe, many scholars believe, that Peter was written before the book of Revelation. That's the common view. 1 Peter was supposedly written 64, 65. Some say perhaps even as early as 63. I tend toward the 64, early 65. But the point is, the scholars point out, and they claim Peter was written before Revelation. Revelation, the majority of scholars say, was written in 95 to 98 AD under Domitian. Well, wait a minute, folks. Wait a minute. And I've got to hurry on this, but this is important because it drives home the point that I'm making to you about the dating of Peter, 2 Peter even, and Jude. Remember, the scholars say Peter was written after Revelation. Well, in Revelation chapter 3, verse 13 and 14, Jesus spoke to the church at Philadelphia and he said, I know your works. And he said, you're strong and you're faithful. And he said, because of your perseverance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is literally about to come. Now here's something you've got to keep in mind. Revelation was written to the identical churches that Peter addressed, that Peter wrote to the churches of Asia. Okay, so here is Jesus, Revelation 3:14, predicting the coming of the fiery trial, and he said it was about to come. Well, in 1 Peter chapter 4, 11 and 12, Peter writing, once again, to the same audience, to the very same audience that Revelation was addressed to. And Peter said, brethren, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial. Now, boy, here's a problem. Many translations give it that is to come upon you. I'm sorry, that is a bad and a false translation. Look, just go to Bible Hub, or BibleGateway.com, and in the search bar, just type in 1 Peter chapter 4, 11 and 12. And do verse 11 and then do verse 12. And you will find something, I think specifically it's verse 12. Let me double check that. Yeah, 1 Peter Verse 11. I'm sorry. I'm looking at chapter 5 instead of chapter 4. Verse 12. Verse 12. Just type in 1 Peter, I don't know why I had that mental lapse there. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial. Now notice, I'm reading from the New King James. Concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. Well, again, go to Bible Gateway, type it in, and you will notice the great majority of translations render it like this. Do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial that is among you. And by the way, the Greek is very clear. The Greek is undeniable. It is not in the future tense. Peter is talking about something that is already in their midst. Now remember, he's writing to the same audience that John did. John said it's about to come. Peter said it's in your midst. Okay, now watch. Peter said, scoffers shall come in the last days. They will pervert the truth. They will bring swift destruction upon themselves. These men, they're false. They're even false apostles. But let's read Jude, verse 16 and following. Remember now, Jude wanted to write to them concerning their common faith, but the danger was so real and so present that he had to write to them. These are grumblers, complainers, walking according to their own lust. They are, present active indicative, great swelling words, flattering people to gain advantage. But you, beloved, remember the words which were spoken to you by the apostles of our Lord Jesus Christ, how they told you that there would be mockers in the last day who would walk according to their lust. These are sensual persons. Listen, folks, the scoffers were there. They were present. What Peter predicted was being fulfilled in Jude's day. They were not looking into the far distant future. And we've got more next week.